Do you think there's a first mover's advantage for corporates when it comes to podcasts?
Given the fact that most corporate podcasts currently are done badly, you're still in a position to make a mark as long as you execute well.
Seeing value, right? What are the kind of timelines you think brands should expect?
In a lot of cases, it's immediate. It's first episode onwards.
We hear some podcasts where the content is very structured, it's very eloquent in the way it's delivered.
Podcast is a place where they want to see the people behind the brand. And if the people behind the brand are going to come across as being artificial.
Measuring ROI, downloads, engagement.
How many clients did you actually build solid relationships with? So many different elements that goes into a client giving you business year on year, right?
The next question, which ties to our question of the guest very quickly, is the content. Right now, I know your personal preference over here, so I'm not asking for that. But tell me, how should brands go about content? We hear some podcasts where the content is very structured, it's very eloquent in the way it's delivered. Then we hear some podcasts where they are free-flowing chats, right? They're going on for a while, and one thought leads to the other, and that's being entertained and encouraged also in a manner. So when it comes to podcasts for brands, for enterprises, what is your recommendation, and tell us why as well?
Got it. What an excellent question, right? So people enjoy being a part of and listening to a genuine conversation, an authentic conversation, a candid conversation, a direct conversation, right? They enjoy being a part of such conversations and listening to such conversations, right? And if you look at some of the world's best podcasters, they manage to do this excellently, right? They have very candid, direct, fun, authentic conversations with their guests. That is what makes their podcast popular. And as a matter of fact, when you do that with guests, you get very insightful conversation too happens, right? Because, the guest in turn has his guards down when he sees somebody who's just candid, authentic, just being themselves and having a conversation, right? So that's why those conversations end up being a lot more insightful for the listeners, right? The opposite of that, Rosh, is when you try to script something too much. And listen, I have seen so many corporate podcasts that are done so badly because they treat a podcast like an advertisement. And when they're making ads, all ads are scripted. And for some reason, they feel that their podcast needs to be scripted too. And if somebody came to us and said, hey, we want a scripted podcast, we would say no to that, right? We would say, hey, we're not your right partner because, we don't want to be the people that end up making an unsuccessful or a bad podcast for you. You want something which is scripted. We're not the right partners because that's not the route to go.
So that's a no-no from, like we say, it's a no-no.
No. And we wouldn't even do a podcast like that, right? Rosh, people can smell, inauthenticity from a mile, right? They can smell it from a mile. And a podcast is a place where they want authenticity. They want to see the people behind the brand. And if the people behind the brand are going to come across as being artificial, fake, scripted, as a matter of fact, you're doing a disservice to your brand through that particular podcast.
And there's enough of staged content, Swapnil.
There's enough of staged content.
All of it. Most of it actually is, designed, crafted, and then put out there.
Correct. And I've seen some horrendous corporate podcasts and brand podcasts that, try to do it because they think they want to get their messaging on point, right? I want to get my messaging on point. And those are people that really don't understand marketing. Neither do they understand branding, and neither do they understand podcasts, right? So anything which is artificial or totally scripted just does not work, right? And doctored, bad idea, right? Now, what should you do with your guests though when you invite them for them, right? For a podcast, and we've done this in the past. It's been very successful. give them a bunch of indicative questions that you may ask them.
Yeah.
Right?
Points of discussion.
Correct. Points of discussion, right? And you say, hey, these are the broad things that we'll end up discussing. But as a note put there that we're going to keep the conversation fluid, right? So it's not that we're going to cover each one of these questions. We could go in any direction based on, what answer you give, right? And, based on that, what further questions do I have? So there's no guarantee that I'm going to ask these questions to you, but these are just indicative topics of discussion, right? Now that really makes your guest comfortable, and that really gives a certain direction to the podcast. Right now, I'll give you an example. We're talking to a higher education and skilling company, right, about their podcast, and I think a great question to ask every guest, right, at the end of the podcast, amongst two or three other questions, is to say, why is it important for a person to keep upskilling themselves in relevant skills, right? Or, why is the topic of skilling so important, right, in a person's life? I think every guest that is called needs to be asked that question, but that doesn't mean that it's scripted, right? That's because in the context of the podcast, that is a very important question, right, that you need to ask. So you could, of course, have the questions that are shared with the guest, but that doesn't make it scripted. That just improves the quality of the discussion, if you ask me. Does that make sense to you, or is that?
Of course, it does. It absolutely does, and that's also it's also how, like I told you, I know your personal preference, right? It's also how we've been having these conversations, and there's so much insight that comes out of it, right? That at the end of it, you and I sit and we have smiles saying we love these inputs that came out during the chat. So I think genuine conversations, insightful conversations, few indicators to help guests prepare for what's going to be discussed, and then letting the conversation flow is so very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like we said, any scripted podcasts are a no-no. Ranx will not be doing that, and that's not something that we encourage, right?
That's not something that we recommend. Just a last point, right? When we're doing company podcasts, there are two routes that they can take, right? So one route is where they have internal hosts, right? And if you have an internal host, we'll do a little bit of, as Ranx, we'll do a little bit of coaching, right, with you and bringing you up to speed. And if we feel that that person is not the right host, we'd also recommend that that person is not the right host, right, the internal person that you have. But we will coach you, right, because the way you conduct that conversation is very important if you're the host, right? The alternative that you have is to go with one of our panel of hosts that we have, right? And these people are experts at doing podcasts, right? Because that will really help bring improve the quality of the conversation, the fluidity, so on and so forth, which really makes a difference,
which is important. Swapnil, one of the objectives of us doing this podcast, the Ranx Insider, is to build a case for enterprises as to why they should do podcasts, right? Do you think there's a first mover's advantage for corporates when it comes to podcasts?
Oh, definitely. As with all things, I think a first mover advantage, there's always an advantage of being a first mover in any space and doing it well, of course, right? If you're just a first mover and do something badly, you're not going to get the advantage.
I think
of it, right?
That's an important point.
Correct. But if you're a first mover and you execute that first move very well, you will see a big advantage, right, of doing that, because you will be the de facto in that particular area. If anybody wants any information in that area, you'd be the de facto podcast to go to. So I think there is a big advantage of being a first mover, as long as you do it well. The first,
as long as you do it well. Yes. And for, say, clients that have not yet jumped in and started with their podcasts, do you think they'll get lost in the clutter if they start off a little later?
Correct. So again, a good question, right? There is a first mover advantage, but in the current world, both internationally, and in India, where we are based out of, most corporate podcasts are done so badly, right, that all that you need to do is execute well, even if you're the third, fourth, or fifth player doing a podcast in that same area, right? So if you execute well, you'll still stand out, because most corporate podcasts are done badly. As a matter of fact, most podcasts are done badly, but most corporate ones are done extremely poorly, right? So there's a great opportunity for, even if you're the fifth player coming in, most of the other podcasts have died at their third or seventh episode already. Right? And even if they're doing it, they don't really have a strategy around it, right? So you can definitely jump in and definitely make a mark. However, just keep in mind, do not have the wrong expectations of the podcast, right? Do not expect you to do one episode and for it to go viral and for you to get millions of views on the podcast. That's not the way corporate podcasts work at all. You're going to be setting yourself up for failure. Then you're going to think that the initiative failed because your expectations were the wrong expectations based on watching the most popular podcast that is there in the world or in India, right? That's, don't set yourself up for failure, right? This is something that in a lot of cases gives immediate returns today. Like I said, when it comes to the access, engagement, the video content that you create, the humanizing the brand, the guests being your evangelists, right? So in all these areas, there is an immediate return that you get, right, from podcast. But, the long-term viewership building up and the engagement building up, that is going to take time. And you cannot compare, a niche area that you do a podcast in to get the kind of views and engagement that a more, general podcast would get, right? Where you call a whole host of different people, right, on it.
Yeah. So what we're saying is there is a first mover advantage provided you do it right.
Yeah.
Right. And another thought I had when I was just, doing some research.
And sorry, Rosh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. And even if you're a late comer, given the fact that most corporate podcasts currently are done badly, or they quit after the third or seventh episode, you're still in a position to make a mark as long as you execute well on it.
Yeah. So, like I was telling you, when I was thinking about this, the closest comparison I could draw is we should think about a podcast as a marathon, not a sprint, right? Because you want this to work out in the long term. You're not just looking at it as an immediate, an immediate dash. Swapnil, I want us to now focus on a very big question, ROI. Every conversation with a client finally comes and dwells on this one piece, right? So as enterprises, how should brands think of measuring ROI? Downloads, engagement, viewership, listenership, what is it?
Correct. This is very interesting. To start with, our interactions with our clients so far, I think we're lucky to have interacted with a lot of smarter clients that have not really asked their questions, because a lot of these people have been in the domain of marketing for very long, right? So they don't want us giving them a made up answer. They want to have real discussions, right? So, any person from marketing that wants to have a real discussion on this knows that you can't perfectly calculate an ROI on an initiative like this, right? However, what are different ways in which you can measure the success of this particular activity? Would I recommend it? Okay, it's good to do, right? So if you're a B2B business, measure this activity in terms of how many clients did you actually build solid relationships with through the podcast, right? So, measure it from that point of view. Measure it from the point of view of access to new customers, right? Then measure it from the point of view of saying that from these new customers in this financial year, did I get any business? The people that I connected with, on the podcast, did I get business from them, right? In this year, that's another thing. Did my existing customers really go out and keep giving me business, right? Now, the reason why I sometimes shudder from this is because having been a business person all my life, I know that it's not one thing that makes a difference, but you need to do a lot of different things as a part of your marketing and sales mix for a lot of these things to happen, right? So just for example, if you're going to continue getting business from an existing customers, and if I say, hey, the podcast that you did is the reason why you're getting that, I think we're all being a little stupid there, right? Because you need to give, great. Your product needs to be great. Your service delivery needs to be amazing. The stakeholder that's dealing with that customer needs to do a good job. So there are so many different elements that goes into a client giving you business year on year, right? Or for that matter, a new client giving you business, right? So can you attribute it totally to the podcast? No, you can't. But kind of these are the different ways in which you can start measuring the effectiveness of it in terms of saying, these many new clients access, these many relationships built with existing people. This was the business that more or less got generated from them. And of course, acknowledging that it's not only because of the podcast, but a host of different things that you do, as a business that makes that happen. Right. Now, you can also look over a period of time saying that is the number of viewers or listeners of my podcast, is that increasing, not increasing over a period of time? I think that's an interesting and important aspect to look at as well. Is the engagement per podcast that I'm putting out, is that increasing or not? I think that's another. But those are ways in which you measure the podcast for you to bring whatever changes that you need to bring in it to improve it further, right? But can you really connect that directly to ROI? I think is difficult, right, for us to do. And anybody that can give you a perfect calculation towards the ROI is more often not doing a bluff job on you, right? He's fooling you, or he's giving some material for you that that isn't really well grounded or isn't really well thought through, right? Which is not what we would do, right, with a person. So, like I said, thankfully, what has happened is a lot of our, I think, marketing people that we're interacting with are very mature marketing people that have been in the game for way too long to ask this question or to get a poor, shallow answer from us, right? And they know that this is, your podcast is just one part of your overall marketing mix, right? And a very important today part of your overall marketing mix because of all the advantages that podcast brings in to you, right? There's a very nice quote that says 50% of all marketing money goes waste. And the problem is you just don't know which 50% it is, right? It's a very old quote by, I forgot who, right? Which I think still holds true, right? In marketing, right? Now, there are certain, I guess, things in your marketing mix where you can, I think, calculate the ROI in a much more simpler fashion, right? So when you do performance marketing, 95% often of your money goes waste in some way, but there is a more direct way in which you can calculate ROI, right? Where you say that, okay, these are the amount of leads that I got, new leads that I got, and this was my conversion there, right? Can you do that in a podcast to the degree that you can do it in a performance marketing campaign? No, you can't, right? Because you're also using the podcast for a different purpose, right? Is access and engagement to customers, building thought leadership, building trust by humanizing the brand, making your guests the brand evangelists, creating amazing video content for your social media. These are the broad objectives that you're trying to meet through it, besides the specific objective that a company will have, which you achieve through the podcast, right? So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah. And what if we had to talk about timelines, right? And I don't mean in terms of seeing immediate ROI, but seeing value, right? What are the kind of timelines you think brands should expect?
Like I said, in a lot of cases, it's immediate. It's first episode onwards that you're getting value, right? Literally first episode onwards, you're getting value. As long as both of us are looking at value from the same lens.
I think that is so important.
Correct, because each one of the 5 points that I keep repeating, each one of them are extremely valuable from a business or a marketing point of view. You're getting that from episode 1. The problem, like I said, however, is if you just think of it in terms of saying, oh, but I haven't got the amount of viewers or listeners. I should have got like multi-thousands of listeners or viewers for my podcast. That's when you're really having the wrong expectation, and that's why you think you failed. You look at it more in terms of...
Sorry, I'm jumping. Is that the wrong expectation, though, for an enterprise brand to have?
It is 100%, right? And by the way, if you want more, viewership and listeners, you can, again, go pump in additional marketing money and boost those particular podcasts on your social media. I wouldn't recommend that, right? I wouldn't recommend, boosting something. The only thing that I would recommend boosting is if you have a short or a clip that is already doing extremely well, right, and is already for some reason got traction, so that people really like that short or like that clip, then you go and spend further marketing money on that. I think that is a smart way of boosting it, right, to get additional viewership, only because there's proof already that people are liking it, right? Otherwise, wrong idea, right, to do it. But yeah, like I said, the value that you get is literally value that you get from the first episode that you're doing of a podcast, right, that you're getting. You don't need to wait for too long, but don't set the wrong metrics for your podcast. That is what will kill the entire initiative, right? And not deliver on the value.
Yeah. So I think understanding what value means when it comes to an enterprise podcast is very, very important, number one. And then recognizing that when we start off with the first or second episode, just having the right stakeholder and an insightful conversation, you're already delivering value, building value. And number three, Swapnil, like I was telling you, I thought of this when I've been researching. I think podcasts also need to be thought of as a marathon a little bit, not just a sprint, right? Your ad campaigns can be a sprint, right? But your podcast can be a marathon because there's just so much value that you can bring consistently. And then in all likelihood, the viewership, the engagement that you're seeking will start building up because you've got the right stakeholders and you've got true, insightful conversations that bring value to your stakeholder, that bring value to the industry as well. Right?
And at all points of time, again, I want to mention this again. When we are talking about podcasts, we're largely talking about the interview format of podcasts, because a podcast could be a, storytelling format, right? Which is a, single person reciting something or talking about something. That's not the format that we encourage or talk about, right? We encourage the most popular form of podcasts all over the world, which is the interview, interaction, discussion, conversation between two people or multiple people format.
Yeah. Okay, Swapnil, anything else on ROI that you want to share?
No, nothing else on ROI. I think don't set yourself up for failure. Don't set the initiative up for failure. Be real about what this is going to deliver. And like I said, you will get value from episode 1. If you want to calculate the ROI, there are ways, like I said, especially for B2B businesses, to look at it. That may not be the only reason why you got business, so on and so forth. But, the podcast will be one of the reasons that really helped, right? So, when we were talking earlier and you said that, I did that yesterday, right? I wanted to buy something and I went on the social media page of a brand. And because that was put together well, right? That built confidence and trust in the fact that I could actually make a purchase from that brand. Now, that's so difficult to calculate from an ROI point of view, right? However, most smart marketers know this already, right? So we've not, at least right now, had to sell them on that in any way.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay, Swapnil, those are all the questions I have for you.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Rosh. A pleasure as always to discuss all things podcast. And this particular episode has been a breeze.